Greetings. This is Brother Eli with another episode of Bible Truth Revealed. Today's teaching is part 2 of a 2-part series entitled The Book of Revelation, Deception. The Book of Revelation, Deception. In part 1, I exposed the plagiarism and deception of the book of Revelation and its irrelevance for righteous Israelites. There are still many Israelites who are sitting on the fence with regards to the New Testament because of the book of Revelation. They mistakenly believe that because the book of Revelation supposedly speaks of end-time events, it is somehow relevant to us today. Therefore, in part 2, I will further demonstrate the irrelevance of the book of Revelation and that it is just another Christian deception that is designed to keep the Israelites and the rest of the world in idolatry. I'll be reading from the King James Version of the Christian Slave Bible. Revelation chapter 1, verses 1 and 3. Revelation chapter 1, verse 1 reads thus: The revelation of J.C., which God gave unto him, to shew unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John. This says that these things must, which means they're not optional. Shortly, which means in the very near future, not in the distant future, but the very near future. In Matthew Henry's concise commentary, we find a quote about Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. It reads thus: These events would surely, that means must, come to pass. And they would begin to come to pass very shortly. So the Matthew Henry's concise commentary, which is a Christian commentary, admits that this is saying that the events in Revelation would surely, which means must, come to pass, and they would come to pass very shortly, not in the distant future. But here we find the first problem. Christians believe that the book of Revelation was written over 2,000 years ago. This means that the things in the book of Revelation should have come to pass 2,000 years ago. That's what must shortly come to pass means, not 2,000 years in the future. Let's check another Christian commentary to see if they agree that the things written in the forged book of Revelation should have already come to pass 2,000 years ago. Ellicott's commentary for English readers says this for Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. Shortly. On this word, much controversy has turned. Its force speedily affords a groundwork, and it must be admitted, a plausible one, to the preterist school of interpreters. The preterists are those who read Revelation chapter 1 verse 1 and they believe it when it says that these things must shortly come to pass 2,000 years ago. They actually believe their Bible. It continues, who hold that the whole range of apocalyptic predictions was fulfilled within a comparatively short time after the apostle wrote. So the preterists hold the position that these things written in the book of Revelation were fulfilled shortly after they were written. They actually believe their Bible. Verse 3 says, "Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand." The time is at hand means these things are going to happen shortly, almost immediately after they are written and delivered to the churches, which means that the preterists who say that these things should have been fulfilled 2,000 years ago are correct according to the text of Revelation chapter 1, verses 1 and 3. The problem is that these things did not happen 2,000 years ago, and this proves to us beyond the shadow of a doubt that the book of Revelation is false. It's a work of fiction that's packed with false prophecies. Prophecies that should have been fulfilled 2,000 years ago, but were never fulfilled. In the New World Encyclopedia, the article entitled Book of Revelation, under the subheading Significance, says this: "No other book in the Christian Bible has produced greater hope or greater fear than the book of Revelation. Its promise of the immediate," let me read that again, "its promise of the immediate second coming of Christ and the establishment of the New Jerusalem has led believers in nearly every generation to interpret its symbols as referring to their own time." In other words, the book of Revelation promised that Christ would come immediately after this book was delivered to the churches. Shortly. The time is at hand. It means immediate. Christ was supposed to come 2,000 years ago, and he did not come, which means that the book of Revelation is false. And it further says that nearly every generation has interpreted the symbols in the false book of Revelation as referring to their own time. They realize that these things that were supposed to happen immediately did not happen. Therefore, they apply that immediately to their days and say that's going to happen any day now. They're looking for JC to burst the eastern sky. That's not going to happen. We have been deceived. It continues, "and to see themselves as part of the 144,000 who will resist the power of the Antichrist and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. And that's pure fiction. That's not going to happen. Quote number 2, under the same subheading, significance, which should really read insignificance, says this: "In today's Christian world, dozens of groups see Revelation as being fulfilled through their ministries." So everybody's laying claim on the book of Revelation being fulfilled through their ministries. Why? It did not get fulfilled 2,000 years ago. It's a false prophecy. Therefore, Christians, desperate to see these things fulfilled, claim that they are happening through their own ministries. It continues, ranging from fundamentalist preachers to millennialist sects such as the Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists, to popular writers of Christian fiction such as Tim LaHaye, and to new religious movements such as the Unification Church. So all of these want to pretend that those things written in the book of Revelation are being fulfilled through their ministries. Yet all these groups are enemies of one another. Every single one of these groups would tell you that the other group is lying. But the fact is, they're all lying, because the book of Revelation has never been fulfilled, is not being fulfilled, and will never be fulfilled because it is pure fiction. It continues with its rich imagery and symbolism. Interpretations of the meaning of Revelation are more diverse than any other biblical text. Again, interpretations of the meaning of Revelation are more diverse than any other biblical text. This means every single Christian group has its own interpretation. They're trying to figure it out because it did not happen. They're trying to understand exactly what it means. The preterists are correct in that it should have happened 2,000 years ago, but because it did not happen, every Christian group, desperate for these things to happen, is coming up with their own interpretation. It continues, ranging from its having been fulfilled in the first century, so that group is claiming it was fulfilled, even though there's no evidence that it has been fulfilled, to it pertaining to the distant future, so those who do not want to face the embarrassment that it will never happen, they push it into the distant future, so that when they're dead and gone, and other people look back and say they were lying, they're already gone. It doesn't matter. To its being fulfilled in the present day. So there are many Christians who believe that the book of Revelation is being fulfilled even today. Let's turn to Revelation chapter 22. That's the very last chapter of this piece of garbage. Revelation chapter 22, I'll read verses 6 to 7, verses 10 to 12, and verse 20. We are going to see that the message remained the same from the beginning to the end of this lying, blasphemous book. Revelation 22, verse 6 reads thus. And he said unto me, these sayings are faithful and true. And the Lord God of the holy prophets sent his angel to show unto his servants the things which must shortly be done. Shortly means quickly, in the very near future. This was supposedly written over 2,000 years ago, and Christians are still waiting for this to be fulfilled. Those Christians are desperate to continue in their deception. Verse 7, behold, I come quickly. Christians need to look up the meaning of the word quickly. It does not mean over 2,000 years later. If someone says to me, hold on, I'm coming back, I'm going to come quickly, and after 10 minutes they're not here, they lied. 2,000 years. It's ridiculous. How could you read this and not realize you're being deceived? Behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he that keepeth the sayings of the prophecy of this book. Verse 10, and he saith unto me, seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. That means it's time now. Do not seal these prophecies because they're about to come to pass. Everybody needs to know about these things because it's happening now. But guess what? None of it happened. It's pure fiction. Let's look at another Christian commentary. This is a pulpit commentary, the most popular and trusted of all Christian commentaries. Your pastor has a copy of this commentary, so your pastor should know what I'm about to read. The pulpit commentary says this about Revelation chapter 22, verse 10. And I quote, "The revelation deals not with events far distant in the future, but with those immediately present." This is telling you that the things in the book of Revelation have nothing to do with what's happening today. They were meant to take place over 2,000 years ago. That's what immediately present means. So this pulpit commentary, which your pastor studies, which every single pastor that went to seminary has read, is telling us that the revelation deals not with events far distant in the future, but with those immediately present. Verse 11 of Revelation chapter 22 reads thus, "He that is unjust, let him be unjust still." Why does it use the word still? Still means to remain that way. He's not going to change. Why? It's too late to change, because these things that are supposed to happen were supposed to happen immediately after this revelation was revealed. It's saying, if you're unjust, don't bother trying to repent. Remain unjust. Be unjust still, because it's too late. And he which is filthy, let him be filthy still. It's too late to change. And he that is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he that is holy, let him be holy still. So therefore, over 2,000 years ago, the end should have come according to this garbage called the book of Revelation. Verse 12, "And behold, I come quickly." This is why it was too late to change, because the false god and idol of Christianity was supposed to come quickly, but he lied. Or rather, the writer of this piece of fiction put lying words in his mouth. It continues, "And my reward is with me, to give every man according as his work shall be." That's why if that man's work was unjust, he would remain unjust to receive the reward of his work. If he was filthy, he would be filthy still to receive the reward of his filthiness. It was too late to change. Verse 20 says, "He which testifieth these things saith, Surely I come quickly. Amen. Even so come, false god and idol of Christianity." The word quickly 2,000 years ago meant the same as the word quickly today. If the Christian God promised them that he would come 2,000 years ago and he did not come, why is it that they insist on being deceived? The Most High God has never once lied to his people. And this is how we know that the book of Revelation and the nonsensical quote-unquote New Testament that was written by the children of Lucifer have nothing to do with righteous Israelites. We reject these books as irrelevant, and we follow the Most High and Him only. When Christians and Christianites discover that the book of Revelation is simply a piece of fiction that is packed with false prophecies that will never come to pass, they are often quick to respond. But what about Matthew 24? Matthew 24 talks about the tribulation. By saying this, they are suggesting that Matthew chapter 24 can be trusted, even if the book of Revelation cannot be trusted. So let's go to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, I will read verses 29 to 34. Matthew chapter 24, verses 29 to 34. And it reads thus. Immediately! There again, we have that false promise. Immediately. The New Testament constantly uses words like immediately, shortly, near, quickly, now. The time is at hand in order to scare people into acting now. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. So firstly, if this is talking about the tribulation that is spoken of in the false book of Revelation, we know that never happened, which proves that this is also false. However, some people insist that this is a different tribulation to the one in the false book of Revelation. They claim that this tribulation happened in the year 70 AD. So this says immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will stop shining, and the stars would fall from heaven. Well, the fact that the sun and the moon continued to shine after 70 AD, and the stars have not fallen from heaven, proves that this nonsense in Matthew chapter 24 is also a false prophecy. Verse 30. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Whether Christians and Christianites believe that the tribulation spoken of in Matthew chapter 24 is the same tribulation that is spoken of in the book of Revelation, that one that never happened 2,000 years ago, or if they believe that it's speaking of a tribulation that was supposed to happen in 70 AD, the fact that the Son of Man, as they call their false god and idol, did not appear in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory proves that this is also a false prophecy. The truth is that the false god and idol of Christianity will never come with power and great glory because he never existed. He is simply a figment of the Christian slave master's imagination that has been whipped into Israelite slaves and used to conquer the world in the name of Christianity. For details of this fact, I recommend my teaching entitled JC Never Existed. JC never existed. Verse 31. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the one end of the heaven to the other. This is what Christians call the rapture. That also did not happen and will not happen. For a thorough understanding of what will take place during the real tribulation, as opposed to the make-believe Christian tribulation, please listen to part 1 of my End Time Prophecies series. It is entitled, The Day of the Lord. That is, the day of the Lord. Verse 32 reads thus. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, Ye know that summer is nigh. So in other words, you can look at the fig tree and see the signs that summer is near. Summer is coming just now. How? When the branch is tender and it's starting to put forth leaves. Verse 33. So likewise ye, which means in the same way you, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. All what things? Remember, the context of Matthew 24 is the tribulation. Therefore, this verse is telling us that when the tribulation happened, the return of the false god and idol of Christianity would be near, even at the doors. What does this mean? Verse 29 tells us what near, even at the doors mean. It said, immediately after the tribulation of those days. So the signs would be the tribulation, and immediately after that, JC was supposed to come. Again, it did not happen. It's a false prophecy. Whether you believe that the tribulation is the same one written of in the book of Revelation, which should have happened 2,000 years ago, or you believe that it's something that supposedly happened in 70 AD, the fact is he did not come immediately after the tribulation of those days. Now, just in case we're still in doubt as to the time period that was being referred to, let's read verse 34. Verse 34 says, Verily I say unto you, this generation, which means the generation that these lies were written to, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. In that generation, over 2,000 years ago, the sun did not stop shining. The moon did not stop giving her light. And the stars did not fall from the sky. So we know that that is another false prophecy. That entire generation passed, and the false god and idol of Christianity has still not come with power and glory. We know for a fact that Matthew chapter 24, just like the rest of the New Testament, is false. Some may ask the question, if the book of Revelation is not true, why does it seem as though the prophecies written in the book of Revelation are happening today? And that's a reasonable question. To answer that, let's go to www.beliefnet.com. That's www.beliefnet.com. It's a Christian website. Let's hear what the Christians on this website have to say in their article entitled, Are the Events of Revelation Taking Place Now? Quote number 1 says this: Revelation is one of the most popular books to discuss among Christians. Everyone has an opinion on when the famous events of the book of Revelation will take place. Preachers and parents discuss who they believe the Antichrist is or will be when he comes. Almost every disaster that has ever struck the world is seen as being a sign of the end times. This means disasters, when they happened 2,000 years ago, they were seen as being a sign of the end times. 1,500 years ago, every disaster was seen as a sign of the end times. 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 200 years ago. Last year, almost every disaster that has ever struck the world is seen as being a sign of the end times. People have been so duped into believing that the book of Revelation is true, that because it speaks about disasters at the end times, they now think that every single disaster means that the world is coming to an end. It continues. Most Christians assume. So not most Christians know, but they assume. They make assumptions. And notice, most Christians, not all Christians, because there are some Christians who are honest enough to recognize that the things that are written in the book of Revelation should have been fulfilled 2,000 years ago. Therefore, by faith, they claim that they were fulfilled 2,000 years ago, although there is no evidence that that ever happened. So again, most Christians assume that the events of Revelation are set to take place in some distant future. Others, however, argue that Revelation is happening now, so everybody has an opinion. Still others argue that Revelation is purely metaphorical, or that the events of the famous book have already occurred. So Christians are divided over this book. It continues. These four viewpoints, because that's what they are, viewpoints, opinions, assumptions, meaning not based in fact, make up the four main interpretations of the events of the end times described in the book of Revelation. So as we can see, the book of Revelation has caused more confusion, stress, and anxiety than any other book in the Christian Bible. Quote 2 in the same article, which attempts to answer the question, are the events of Revelation taking place now, or is Revelation happening today, says this: though there is no proof, there is no proof, there is no proof. Some people also argue that the Antichrist is already working to gain political, military, and economic control in this world. But there is no proof. It's all assumption. Personal viewpoints, their own interpretations on this piece of fiction called the Book of Revelation. It continues. Prophecies are difficult to predict, but Christians have a lot riding on accurately predicting or identifying the time of Revelation. They have a lot riding on this. They need to get it right. After all, it is then that the world as it is known today will come to a close, and Christ will once again walk among men. As Christians, the owners of this website believe that the false god and idol of Christianity actually existed. But at least they are honest enough to admit that there is no proof that the lies written about the Antichrist in the false book of Revelation are happening today. It is all assumptions and speculations by people who are desperate for their fake book to be true. This is what it means by Christians have a lot riding on accurately predicting or identifying the time of Revelation. If Christians could be honest and actually believe the book of Revelation, what it says at the very beginning and at the very end, they would recognize that these things were meant to happen shortly, quickly, immediately. The time was at hand 2,000 years ago according to this piece of fiction and recognize that these are false prophecies that never came to pass, that are not coming to pass today, and that will never come to pass in the future. Let's look at examples of things that did not happen, are not happening, and will not happen. Number one, there will be no Antichrist and no mark of the beast. That's pure fiction. 2, there will be no rapture. Number 3, Satan will not be thrown into a bottomless pit for 1,000 years. 4, there will be no 1,000-year reign with Christ. 5, no one will suffer forever in a lake of fire. None of these things is even hinted at in the Holy Scriptures, which Christians call the Old Testament. These things are pure fiction. And number 6, there will be no resurrection of the wicked, because only the righteous will be resurrected. For details of this fact, please listen to part 3 of my End Time Prophecy series. It is entitled, The Resurrection of the Righteous. That is, the resurrection of the righteous. Some people insist that when we see whales and other sea creatures washing up on the shores, or flocks of birds falling from the skies, these are signs that the prophecies of the book of Revelation are coming to pass. Let's read this so-called prophecy in Revelation chapter 8, verses 8 to 9, so I can demonstrate that it is again a false prophecy. Revelation chapter 8, verses 8 to 9 reads thus. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. So we know that never happened, which means it's a lie, it's a false prophecy. Verse 9, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. So this bit is what they hold on to, and they say, look how many creatures in the sea. They've died. Oh my word, the book of Revelation is coming to pass. It continues, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Now, these things are meant to have been destroyed by a great mountain burning with fire that was cast into the sea. And the sea was meant to become blood when this happened. You don't get to pick a few words from this false prophecy and apply it to what's happening in our world today and claim that this is evidence that the book of Revelation is true. For hundreds of years, the sea creatures and the birds have been systematically destroyed by the children of Lucifer in order to deceive the world into believing that the book of Revelation is coming to pass. Their agenda is to control the world by fear. That's why we read earlier in the New World Encyclopedia under the article The Book of Revelation that no other book in the Christian Bible has produced greater hope or greater fear than the book of Revelation. That's the agenda, to control the world by fear. Making these false prophecies appear to come true is one sure way to get people to panic, thinking the world is about to end. What's worse is that the book of Revelation claims that God is destroying the earth, that he's told these angels to throw this mountain of fire to make the sea blood and to kill these animals in the sea. That couldn't be further from the truth. The book of Daniel tells us explicitly that the fourth kingdom, which is the current ruling power, is the one that would trample and destroy the earth, not the Most High. So they are destroying the earth and suggesting, according to their piece of fiction called the Book of Revelation, which they wrote, that the Most High is the one that's doing it. Let's turn to Daniel chapter 7. I will read verses 23 and 25 from the Brenton Septuagint translation. That's Daniel chapter 7, verses 23 and 25. It reads thus: "And he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom on the earth." That's the kingdom that's ruling now, "which shall excel all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and trample and destroy it." It is the fourth kingdom that's destroying the earth, not the Most High. Verse 25, "And he shall speak words against the Most High," such as accusing the Most High of destroying the earth, "and shall wear out the saints of the Most High." The saints of the Most High are the Israelites, and we are being worn out by this ruling kingdom, by the children of Lucifer, "and shall think to change times and law." This is why there are people who genuinely think that the day begins in the night. It makes no sense, but the ruling kingdom has changed times and law. This is why it is lawful nowadays to do things that are abominable and unlawful according to the laws of the Most High God. It continues, "And power shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time." So we can see clearly that the Most High is not destroying the earth. It is the fourth kingdom that's destroying the earth to make it look as though the book of Revelation is coming to pass and to control the world by fear. In conclusion, we have seen that the book of Revelation is packed with false prophecies that were supposed to be fulfilled 2,000 years ago. The fact that the book itself uses words such as "must shortly come to pass," "the time is at hand," "shortly," "quickly," and "immediately," to indicate when these prophecies should have been fulfilled, is enough for genuine truth seekers to stop and realize that there is something seriously wrong with the book. It is a work of fiction that must not be taken seriously by righteous Israelites. We have all the end time prophecies that we need in the Holy Scriptures, which Christians call the Old Testament. The so-called prophecies in the New Testament are not from the Most High. Righteous Israelites do not need the Christian New Testament in order to know what will happen in the last days. I pray that my people would take heed to the warning before it's too late, and that they will repent before the Most High punishes them for continuing willfully in this Christian deception. And with that, I say, Shalom.